الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والسيد المرسلين وشفيع المذنبين سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين لا سيما مولانا وسيدي صاحب العصر والزمان روحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء وأجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف ولعنة دائمة على أعدائهم ومنكر فضائلهم إلى الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين أما بعد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. For the hastening of the return of our 12th Imam, Imam al-Hujjah, one salawat upon Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. My dear brothers and sisters in Iman, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Tonight, as we continue on in this tragic commemoration of Muharram and we reach to the 8th night of this month, we continue in our expose and our review of chapter number 17, which is Surah Bani Israel, also known as Surah Al-Isra, the chapter of the Mi'raj, the ascension of Rasulullah to the heavens. And we look at verse number 32 tonight. Verse 32, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, A'udhu billahi minash shaitani rajim, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا إِنَّهُ كَانَ فَاحِشَةً وَسَاءَ سَبِيلًا. Allah says, and keep away from zina, fornication. Surely it is an abominable act and an extremely evil practice. Now, about a year ago, in October of 2017, there was a hashtag on Twitter which literally blew up the internet. That was the hashtag of Me Too. Maybe many of us remember that hashtag. It's still going on today. That was a hashtag in which primarily women were fed up with the sexual abuse, exploitation, the sexual innuendos that men in a level of power and authority, in which men were trying to use that power, the authority they had, to obviously get their way with these women. And the women basically had enough of it. They were fed up with this situation, whether that be in Hollywood, whether that be in the academia, whether that be in just in the regular businesses. And they launched this movement for them to have a voice. For the voiceless, we can say, to have a voice to protest the injustices which were being meted out to women primarily, although not exclusively, but for the most part it was women. Now, we as human beings accept the fact that the world is still the same. The world physically has not changed since the times of the earlier prophets and earlier communities. Yes, time has progressed, but time is time. And so what happens, or what has happened over the ages, is that you and I as human beings, Muslims or non-Muslims, that we have basically got to a level of degradation, of human degeneration, where we feel that we have a right to exploit other people, those who are, the most vulnerable of a society. And in fact, when you study a lot of what these women primarily went through, you'll see the levels of humiliation that they had been put through. The levels of utter, humiliation that men in power, in places of authority, had subjected these women to. And actually, in some of the circumstances, it was probably much worse than what you see in the Quran of previous generations. Previous generations where Allah utterly destroyed previous communities because of their sins and debauchery. Today we see it happening in the mainstream, and very little can be done to counter this wave. Tonight I want to look at this issue of not only the Me Too movement, specifically, but the general notion of this verse of the Quran, where Allah tells us, La taqrabu zina, where He says that do not even come close to sexual impropriety. where we don't engage in any form of illicit relationship with the opposite gender outside of the boundaries of marriage. First off, we realize as Muslims, as human beings, that Allah, our Creator God, has put within each and every one of us certain desires, certain passions. We have certain powers. We have certain things that we, basically that we use to lead this life. We have the intellect Allah has given us. God has given us the power of thought. He's given us the power, as scholars say, of imagination. We have this power of anger. And Allah has given us the power of shahwa, of desires. Of a man to desire a woman. For a woman to desire a man. And there's nothing wrong with that. Islam says that that is a God-given quality, a characteristic that we as humans have. There's nothing wrong with it, but Islam says that when it comes to this attraction of the opposite genders, Allah wants you and I to channel that energy, channel that desire in the correct way, by using the proper methodology, by looking at the verses of the Quran for us as Muslims, by looking at the life of the Prophet and the family of the Prophet, and how they explained this to us, and how they, on a practical level, went through and basically taught us, the methodology of how man and woman should be interacting with one another. And so tonight I want to look at some of the rulings that we have, some of the understandings that our scholars have of how this relationship should be cultivated, how it should be matured, and how it is something which does not distance us from Allah. Because you look at some religions out there in the world today, and they tell us that if you have to choose between the lesser of two evils, then go ahead and get married. Some religions actually today promote a lifestyle of celibacy, that you don't get married. You get closer to God by remaining single as a bachelor or a bachelorette. You don't go and get married and have a family and have children, because that will divert you from God. And you see this in the media today, where those strong proponents of living a life of celibacy, they are unfortunately the worst at breaking these rules. And there are many examples of them going and pleading guilty and paying penalties and fines around the world. And so we have to realize that this is an ingrained characteristic Allah has given us, but we have to channel the energies in the right way. We have to use it in the proper way if we wish to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The Quran is very clear when God tells us that He created man and woman to reside amongst themselves. You look at right when God begins in the Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah, where He talks about creating a human being who would be the Khalifa, the vicegerent of God on earth, Prophet Adam, peace be upon him. You look in Surah Al-Baqarah and Surah An-Nisa, Allah tells us that it's not just Adam that God created, but He made the partner of Adam. As Allah tells us, where He mentions in Surah An-Nisa, where He says that have reverence of your Lord. الَّذِي خَلَقَكُم مِّن نَفْسٍ وَاحِدَةٍ وَخَلَقَ مِنْهَا زَوْجَهَا. That have reverence of your Lord who created you from one soul. And then He created from that one its mate, its partner. So right in the beginning of the Quran, whereas other religions will say that, Eve was a temptation for Adam, that she tempted him towards sin, where women are going through the challenges of childbirth because of their temptations that they engaged in paradise. Islam looks at it in another way, that God wanted man and woman to dwell on earth. He wanted us to get to know one another, to marry one another. As He says in chapter 30, Surah Rum, where He says, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ, one of the signs of God, that He says is, أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا. He created from you, from yourselves, your spouse. لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا, that you may find tranquility in your spouse. You may find comfort When you come home from a hard day at work, your wife is there, or the husband is there. If the wife is working, she comes home, the husband is there to make her feel at home, relaxed, at ease, in a state of tranquility. And then our Creator says, وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَالرَّحْمَةً, that God has placed this reciprocating love between the husband and wife, and He put mercy between the spouses. If a woman was to be an evil temptation, as other religions claim, if people who say that, there is no good in a woman, if they were to look at verses like this where God raises the level of a woman, that she is one that brings tranquility into the home. If we look at the life of the Ahlul Bayt, peace be upon them, when Amir al-Mu'mineen, when he was asked by his father-in-law, the Messenger of Allah, after the first night of the wedding, that how did you find Fatima Zahra? This is your first day after marriage. And he replies that she is the best woman, or the best way for me to get closer to Allah, the best way that I can get closer to Allah. Then we realize that there is the Islam has no way or no room to differentiate and say that one of the genders is evil or corrupt or is trying to mislead the society. And so we realize that this is a ingrained human characteristic, to find our spouse, to find that individual and draw that comfort and solace within our lives. But Allah tells us that before you get to that level where you're married, that we have to be careful, right? And we live today in countries which are really literally an ocean of corruption, right? You walk out on the streets and unfortunately you see things that we shouldn't have to see. You watch the television and you see things that obviously are not permissible for us to watch. Even the internet, as we know, there's so much filth and corruption on there that it is almost difficult sometimes to inoculate and protect ourselves, our children, our family from all of the corruption around us. And that's where Islam tells us again that the root of the answer for a lot of the challenges of society is to get married. And I talked about that last night, about getting married especially at an early age, with the caveat that I didn't mention last night, but let me just mention it, that we make sure that the boy and the girl are ready to get married. We don't push them to marriage if they're not yet ready, nor do we push them away from marriage when they are ready. We allow our sons and daughters to have open communication with us as parents, and when they're ready to embark on that journey to find their spouse and get married, we give them the room, we give them the opportunity to express themselves and to let us know what they feel inside. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. But before those wedding vows are made, we realize that in Islam we have very stringent conditions about what can and cannot happen between a man and a woman who are not related, right? We know that there are at least 3 ways of establishing relationships in Islam which would make a man or a woman somebody who we'd call the mahram, somebody who you are able to, for example, not wear the hijab in front of, somebody that you can shake their hand or hug them and there's no impermissibility with that. Obviously one of them is through just the natural family. So mother, father, brother, sister, they're mahram, they're maharim of one another. So obviously the mother doesn't wear hijab in front of the children. The sister can hug her brother, the girl can hug her father, and there are other obviously family members that extends to. Cousins are not one of them. Sometimes we say, well, he's my first cousin, I should be able to hug him. No, you can't. And the reason why is because theoretically you could marry your first cousin, although most people don't, and in some countries it might not be allowed, but religiously speaking, because it is permissible, that person is not within your level of being within that family circle. So those rules of not touching, not hugging, not shaking their hands, they apply to those individuals. And obviously for all other people that we meet on the street. right? And this is where a lot of the questions come in and the challenges come up. I go to university, or I go to work, or I go to a business meeting, and the first thing that we do is we shake hands with the individual. And as Muslims, we know that this is haram. It's forbidden for me to shake the hand of somebody of the opposite gender that I'm not related to. You know, it's a difficult pill to swallow for many of us. We say, well, you know, what if I lose my business? What if I lose my promotion at work? What if people take it the wrong way? And so we have to be civil about it. We have to be respectful about it. We have to explain to the people sometimes that, look, I don't shake the hands of a person of the opposite gender out of respect, out of a religious regulation that we have, that we limit interaction between the genders, especially today where we see that Me Too movement and so much happening. It becomes all the more a better excuse that we can give, or a better rationale why we don't have that close relationship. Because we don't want to, we want to keep it at a professional level. And we don't want there to be any false accusations of something happening that could ruin somebody's career, or ultimately even somebody's marital life. One of the beauties that Islam gave us in terms of this, looking at the concept of zina, and when Allah tells us, don't come even close to zina, meaning that don't even perform those actions or go to those places that may lead you to an action which would be a precursor to an illicit sexual relationship, is that we have been given not just one, but two forms of marriage. Right? We know that the Quran in chapter 4, Surah An-Nisa, the chapter of the women, verse 24, Allah clearly speaks about the form of marriage that we call the temporary marriage. Now this is a huge controversy in the communities. Muslims are divided. The majority Muslim community, they say it was forbidden by Rasulullah. They have hadith in their books actually where the second caliph is clearly heard as saying that there were two mut'as at the time of the Prophet, and I make them both haram, and I punish whoever will perform them. And one of them, he says, is the mut'a of the women. But as followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, we disregard those traditions. And we say that no, Allah out of His infinite mercy, knowing the needs that we have as men and as women, that He allowed us to have a unique form of marriage which could be for a certain time period. It's not for everybody. It is for all time, but it's with certain conditions. It is something which has to be used at the appropriate time, but we have to realize that we can't brush it under the rug. You know, to give you a real life story, just for you to better appreciate why we can't hide this form of marriage, is I remember a young family who came to us many, many years ago in another country. And the father, mother, the family members were there, and they were in tears. They were upset, they were in tears because their son met a nice Christian girl at university. And that nice Christian girl that he met became a nice pregnant Christian girl. But they weren't married in any form or another. And so the parents came to us and they said that, can we get an abortion? Can we let her get an abortion? This is a stain on our family. They were a respectable family in their own community. And they said, can we get an abortion so this child doesn't come into this world as an illegitimate child, that our name is not ruined in the community? And our answer was obviously, no, that's haram, it's forbidden. Abortion is allowed in our Sharia in limited instances if the mother's life is completely at risk and she risks, losing her life by carrying through the pregnancy. But we don't believe in abortions for unwanted pregnancies. It's not a Muslim thing. And so we told her, no, unfortunately you can't. And when we asked them, didn't he know about this other form of marriage? It was almost like they saw a ghost, that they had never heard of it. Mother and father who are 50, 60, 40, 50 years old, whatever they were, they had never heard of this form of marriage to teach it to their son. Again, I don't condone it and say we should just use it as we want. But we have to realize that if there is a time between doing an act which is haram, which may lead to us going into hell for perpetuity, forever, and performing this form of marriage, the options are clear. We do the halal, the permissible, to keep away from the haram. But we also have the permanent form of marriage, which is the norm. It's not the option, this is the norm in Islam. Islam encourages. We have so many traditions. You marry, you have completed half of your faith. The prayers, the salat of a married person compared to a bachelor are 70 times. There's so many traditions about that. And you look at how Islam made marriage so simple. It sometimes baffles me that anybody in our community could even think about going towards zina. Look at how simple marriage is. It's a mahar, a gift that the man gives to the woman. It doesn't have to be 50,000 pounds. It could be a small amount. It could be something symbolic. You have the mahar. You have, obviously the woman has to have her father's permission. If she's a virgin, she needs to have the explicit permission of her father or guardian. But it's simple. You make the mahar. You recite 4 or 5 words. You don't even have to have Maulana there. You don't have an alim in the community. It can just be the boy and the girl on their own with a representative, or on their own, and they're married. And then they live happily ever after. Islam made it so simple, but yet when you look at our cultures, you see how difficult our cultures made it. Weddings that take 7 days to complete, where we spend tens of thousands of pounds or dollars on a wedding, where we have to have certain items and clothing and jewelry and events that have to take place in a certain order, or else the community will talk about us. Right? If those are there and people want to do it and the boy and the girl are accepting of it, fine. But if we make that a preventative that prevents our children from getting married, then keep in mind this verse of the Quran where Allah says that zina, that He says that إِنَّهُ كَانَ فَاحِشَةً وَسَاءَ سَبِيلًا, that this is a evil indecency, and it's an evil road, a dirty road, a wicked road that we tread upon. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. One more salawat upon Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Because the time is short for tonight, I'm going to try and conclude as quick as possible. I want to mention some practical resolutions or practical ways that we can keep away, as Allah said, La taqrabu zina. Do not even come close to zina. Meaning that Islam is telling you and I that make sure that whatever might lead to the action, that you don't do that. You nip it in the bud before you get to that act. Right? And our scholars of jurisprudence, the maraja, the ulama that we follow, they have multiple things that they talk about in their books. I'm just going to summarize them into a few, and so we can better appreciate what Islam has put into place and maybe some of the rationale behind it. One of the first things that we have is that we're told that men and women in normal circumstances, that we should be separated by the genders. For example, in a majalis like this, in a gathering like this, where there is no need to have interaction, let's say, between the men and the speaker or the women and the speaker, a partition should be there. There should be a curtain or a wall or something to separate the genders. Now, we're not going to say that, that all of us are going to look at the women or the women will look at the men and have bad thoughts. But we want to, just like doctors tell us that prevention is better than cure, right? Try to prevent the problems from happening rather than having to deal with the situation when it arises. So the partition is there when we don't have to have interaction. But for example, we go to school, we go to, primary school, we go to university, maybe we go to a religious seminary here in this country, where it's not practical to have a partition. So Islam says that no, that partition can be moved. Women on one side, men on the other. As long as there's respect between the genders, there is no flirtatious attitude happening back and forth, partition can be moved. There can be an open forum, there can be an open dialogue, an open discussion. So the partition is there in limited circumstances, and it can be again taken away when the situation and the need arises for it to be removed. We then are told that a man and a woman are not allowed to be in seclusion together. Now that doesn't mean a woman can't ride in a taxi with a male driver because there's windows that people can see into, but I'm talking about in seclusion at home, right? Or let's say you're at school and you're working on a project and you're in the library and you were forced to work with a member of the opposite gender. It's not the ideal situation, but it can be worked upon. You can work around it. But for example, to say, well, come back to my room and to my dorm room and we'll work on the project together. No, that's where Islam again draws that boundary, draws that line. That a man and a woman can interact at a respectable professional level in the public, in an open gathering, in an open venue. But when it comes to privacy, as the hadith says, that when two people, a man and woman, are alone, the third person is Satan, Iblis. And he will tempt us. This is his job. This is his goal in life. He told Allah, فَبِإِزَّتِكَ لَأُغْوِيَنَّهُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ, that I, by your glory, God, I swear that I will misguide all of your creations. Of course, except for the mukhlasin, those who Allah has protected and purified, meaning Muhammad and Ali Muhammad alayhum as-salatu was-salam. La Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. The third point that our scholars say is about the beautification. We talked about that in the Q&A session. And you can refer to the Marja Taqlid, the scholar that you follow his rulings on. But you'll see that even to beautify the self, again, for men and women. I don't want to just say that women have hijab. Yes, they have a hijab. They have a unique hijab where they cover most of their body. And the scholars say that the only thing that can remain open is the face. And the face is defined in our fiqh as what is washed in wudu. Right? You don't wash your ears, so the ears have to be covered. Those parts which are washed in wudu can remain open. And the hands, the fingers up to the wrist. Socks are a must. Socks are wajib in hijab. Right? It's not a recommendation, it is an obligation for the sisters to wear even socks in their hijab. And hijab isn't just a scarf on the head, right? What is the use if you're wearing a scarf but you're wearing a t-shirt, as many times it's been seen? Or you wear pants which are 2 sizes too tight, that show off the physique. This isn't hijab. And hijab is also an attitude. It's the way that you interact, how you speak to men, how you interact with people. It's not just the clothing, it's a multifaceted hijab. But men, we have the same thing. So men say, well, I can go to the beach and take my shirt off and there's women there. That's haram for men. Or you say, well, I'm going to the swimming pool and it's a mixed session of men and women, but I'm not looking at the women, but I'm going to take my shirt off and go in a public swim. This is haram for men. We have hijab as well. We don't have the same hijab of covering the body. We can keep our arms open, but there are limits of what we can keep open, what we expose, where we expose ourselves. So men, we also have to be careful, just as women have to be careful. And it's not that Allah wants us to be limited, but Allah realizes, as I said in the beginning, that sexual desires are a part of our nature. And if we don't cover up and be respectable, then we run the risk of running or having a society full of all that promiscuity, where people can be molested and attacked, and we never condone it. I'm not going to say that a woman deserves it. No, she doesn't deserve to be attacked or called names just because of the way she dresses. But we have to realize that as men and women in a society, we all owe it to ourselves and to one another that we follow these dictates to have a safe and sound society to live in. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. One of the last points in this area is also the level of interaction in terms of physical connection. As I mentioned, I touched upon it, even a handshake to a non-mahram is impermissible. Again, we have to be wise about it. We have to be able to explain to them why it's not permissible. And let me just give you an anecdote that happened in my own life when I had gone to a bank one time in Canada. I went to the bank for some work, and the person helping me, the financial planner, was a woman. And so, as you know, just out of her nature, she went to shake my hand. I apologized. I said, "I'm sorry, I don't shake the hands of women who we're not related to." So she said, okay. She was okay with it. She had a cross around her neck. She was apparently a devout Christian woman. Later on in my discourse with her, in the interaction, she asked me that, "What religion do you follow?" I told her, "I'm a Muslim, I follow Islam." She said, "Well, what is the rationale behind this, this lack of physical connection between man and a woman?" And I explained to her some of the nuances of the religion, whatever came to my mind at the time. And God is my witness, she said to me, "I wish I could do the same thing every day in my job." She says, "I wish as a Christian woman I could refuse to shake the hand of men I don't know, but because I live in this society and this is my job, I have to do it." Right? It showed me that even there are people out there who don't want to engage in that level of physical connection. And they're not Muslims, they're other religions, but they don't like to do it, but they're forced because of the society that they live in. Yes, again, we might be forced because of our situation, but we have to have that strength, that courage to be able to say, "I'm sorry, I can't shake your hand for this and this reason." And so what is the outcome? I'll end with this. How do we prevent what Allah said? وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا zina. Do not come close to acts of sexual impropriety. Where He says, إِنَّهُ كَانَ فَاحِشَةً وَسَاءَ سَبِيلًا, that this is indeed an act of open evil, an open act of open sinning, and it is a dangerous path to tread upon. As I said even last night, and I mentioned it briefly a few moments ago, the age of marriage and our children's readiness to get married. But not only that, we have to begin to somehow break some of the taboos that we have in terms of marriage. People will say, "I'm from a Sayyid family. My children don't marry anybody except for Sayyids. And they have to be from my village, from my town, from my street, back home in whatever country I come from." Right? Islam never said that. Show me one verse of the Quran or Hadith, or one example from any of our 12 Imams where they said a Sayyid from Pakistan or India or Iran or Iraq can only marry another Sayyid. It doesn't exist. And those scholars that perpetuate that myth, they're lying about it. Flat out, they're lying about it. Because we don't have any proof to give us that understanding. Hadith tell us, the Prophet says, when a man comes to propose to your daughter, and you are impressed by his religion and his akhlaq, his morals, marry him to your daughter. Because if you don't, he says that corruption will spread across the earth. Right? So that's one thing. We also have to realize that we have to break this cultural boundary. We're from X country. We don't marry people from another country. Right? We're whatever complexion. We don't marry people of a darker complexion. We don't marry people of that particular background. Right? We don't want them because they're from that particular region of the world. Again, there's nothing in Islam that shows us that the Rasul, that he said, well, you're an Arab, you're from Africa, you can't marry. No, the Prophet never did that. He never said an Arab couldn't marry an African, or an African only had to marry from their own community. He was inclusive. The early community were inclusive. They allowed mixed marriages to happen in the community, right? Because it was about a Muslim man marrying a Muslim woman. If they were compatible in terms of their iman, their faith, their conviction, they both were walking down the same path of Islam, then they should be marrying one another. There should be no barriers, right? There should be no cultural, barriers that we say, well, my child can't marry somebody from that culture or that language or that nationality or whatever other stereotypes or discriminating factors that we use. We have to be open and accepting. And especially we live in countries where, we've come from so many different parts of the world. Maybe if we were still back home in our village, in our little street or a little alleyway, we could limit who we married. They all looked like us. They all spoke our language. They all made the same kind of food. But we live in a multicultural society with much diversity. There's probably people in this room from 5 or 6 or 7 different nationalities. And we should appreciate the fact that Allah created us like this. He tells us in the Quran that إِنَّ خَلَقْنَاكُم مِّن ذَكْرٍ وَأُنثَى وَجَعَلْنَاكُم شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. He created us as men, as women, of different nations, of different tribes, of nationalities, of different colors, as Allah says in the Quran, as different languages, that we may get to know one another and respect one another. Not to put up walls and barriers that you go over here, you only marry that kind of person, you only marry this kind of person. All of this was broken by the Quran, by the Prophet, and by the Ahlul Bayt alayhum as-salatu was-salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And last but not least in these final points is that it's not only enough to break these barriers and to facilitate the marriages. As a community, we have to be able to provide the right education to our boys and girls. There are many communities where I come from in Canada where the scholars will have actually premarital sessions where they'll teach the young men and women what marriage is about, what to have, what expectations to have. As a man, don't expect that you'll come home and your wife will run to the door to hug you and have dinner ready and massage your feet and have the television ready and your cup of tea ready. Right? She's not your slave, she's your wife. She's what Allah says that give you tranquility, but she's not your servant. You're not paying her to do all of this. Right? And as we know, the hadith tell us that even if you have children and your wife decides to breastfeed your children as the husband, you have to pay her if she demands a wage for it. Inshallah, she won't because it's a family unit. But we have to teach our young men and women what are the roles of the man and the woman before they watch television and get corrupt by what the Western media says is the role of a woman or the role of a man. We have to have a system where if they have arguments that they can come and talk to a counselor, where they can iron out their disputes rather than just jumping to divorce. We live in an age where divorce is so easy. You can just find somebody online to do your talaq for you and boom, you're done. Right? The divorce should always be the last measure after you've exhausted every other option. But it calls for education, to educate ourselves, our children, what are expectations, what are the rules of marriage. And once we get to that level, then we will see that we'll be able to have our children marry from within the community, where they'll know their responsibilities, they'll know the rights of the woman, the wife. She will know her rights and her responsibilities in the home, where the man will know his rights and his responsibilities. And we won't have to worry about relationships outside of marriage. We won't have to worry about the man looking at other women. We won't have to worry about the woman and her contemplating, whatever it is she wants to do because her husband is not fulfilling his responsibilities as a man. Before we conclude tonight with the Masa'ib, I've been asked one time tonight again to just remind us about the appeal that the committee has put in terms of the fundraising for these majalis. As the brother mentioned, that there is a budget of £24,000 to keep these majalis afloat, to keep the message of Sayyid al-Shuhada within this community and keep it to continue to not only subsist at this level, but really to grow it at greater levels. And so as the volunteers are going around on the men's side and also onto the ladies' side, I would just give us this 1 or 2 minutes before we go to the tragedy of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam and his family, that if we have not yet given or had an option or opportunity to contribute to the Muharram fund, that we give whatever we can on this night where we commemorate the sacrifice of Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, the son of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. One more salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Tonight, as we get closer and closer to the day of Ashura, and as we remember the fallen heroes on that day, we turn our attention to an individual who, although I would say is one of the greatest shuhada, but it's hard to really put the shuhada in a category. But without a doubt, Abul Fadl Abbas, the son of Amir al-Mu'mineen, is somebody whom I'm sure we all love and respect and look up to. I'm sure there's many parents in this room right now who name their sons Abbas. I'm sure there's many mothers in this gathering tonight who, when they were pregnant, who maybe when they were trying to conceive, they made another to Allah. They made a promise to Allah that, Ya Allah, allow me to conceive a child, and I promise I'll name him Abbas, after that Alamdar, after the flag bearer of Sayyid al-Shuhada. And I'm sure without a doubt, because Abul Fadl Abbas is known as Babul Hawa'ij, he is the one through whom our du'as are accepted. Brothers and sisters, Abul Fadl Abbas is not an ordinary individual. He's not an ordinary shaheed on the day of Ashura. As I said, he was the son of Amir al-Mu'mineen. He was the son of the commander of the faithful. He is the one who we refer to as the door of the acceptance of our du'as, of our supplications. And tonight, as we remember this great, brave warrior, we take ourselves back to that night before the day of Ashura. That night when Sayyid al-Shuhada was in the tent, when he had told the companions and the family that he was going to put out the candle, and that he allowed the people, he said that those people on the enemy forces, they are only here for my blood, they don't want any of you. In fact, it got to the level where Abul Fadl Abbas at least twice on the day of Ashura or shortly before that, he was given a promise, a guarantee of protection, because he was a part of the family of Shimr ibn Dhil-Jawshan, and he was given protection. He said, we'll let you go, we'll let you be safe, don't worry about anything. But brothers and sisters, Abul Fadl Abbas, he was there for his master, for his Mawla, Sayyid al-Shuhada. We know that as he was given an opportunity, he said that he would never give in, that he would never give and go over to the ways of the enemies. And eventually, as the day of Ashura approached, as the brave warriors were going one after the other, and as Imam Hussein and Abul Fadl Abbas would be on the hill, as they would be looking over the area of where the Shuhada were giving their lives one after the other, as they were going and they would bring the bodies back to the camp every time somebody would fall. Eventually it got to a point where Abu Abdullah is looking around, where he lets that request out, that Hal min nasirin yansurna, is there anybody out there who will come and help us? Is there anybody out there who can come and pledge their support for us, the Ahlul Bayt? Abul Fadl Abbas looks around and he looks at his master Hussein and he says to him, oh my master, he says, who is there other than the two of us currently on this tragic day? Brothers and sisters, Abul Fadl Abbas, as we know that he had this burning desire to go and help his Mawla on the day of Ashura. Every time Abul Fadl Abbas would ask his Mawla that give me the permission to go and kill these individuals, to send them to Jahannam, Imam Hussein would keep telling him, no, Abbas. He would say, Abbas, you are my standard bearer. You are the one who holds my flag. If you were to go into the enemy's ranks and you were to fall, and that flag of ours was to fall, everybody would lose their hope on the day of Ashura. This is the last time that Abul Fadl Abbas asked his Mawla, and Imam Hussein gives that last reply. But Abul Fadl Abbas replies to Imam Hussein. He says, oh ya Sayyidi, oh my master. He says, who is there other than the two of us? Even if the flag falls, there is no more army left. All of our family have given their lives. Everybody has gone one after the other. All of our friends and companions have given their lives. Imam Hussein says, as he's talking to Abul Fadl Abbas, as he's talking, he hears the cries from the tent of Al-Atash, Al-Atash. The children are crying in the tent. The children who have not had water for 3 days. The women are screaming of the thirst of the heat of the day of Ashura. Sayyid al-Shuhada tells his brother Abbas, he says, oh Abbas, he says, if you have to go to the war front, he says, at least take this bag and try to get some water to quench the thirst of the children of the tent. Try to get a bit of water to quench the thirst of the ladies who are suffering of the heat of Ashura. Brothers and sisters, Abul Fadl Abbas, he mounts his horse and he goes into the battlefield. Before he begins to fight with the enemies, he begins to deliver a poignant sermon. He begins to tell them that, do you know who this man is? Do you see this man who's gharib? Do you see this strange man, this lonely man? That you've killed everybody in his family. Are you willing to kill the son of the daughter of Rasulullah? Umar ibn Asad and the other enemy forces, they begin to taunt and they begin to make fun. They say that, yes, we will go and kill this man. Abul Fadl Abbas, he makes his way back to the tents. He makes his way back to Abu Abdullah. He tells him the response that he's gotten from the enemy forces. As Imam Hussein begins to speak to him again, Abul Fadl Abbas, he hears the cries of Al-Atash, Al-Atash, the thirst is killing us, oh our dear uncle. Imam Hussein, without saying a word, looks at Abul Fadl Abbas. Abbas begins to go towards the enemy ranks. He sees that there is a way to get to the Furat, to get a bit of water. The writers of the Maqtal mention that the enemies, there's thousands of enemies around the water, but they're all cowards. As Abul Fadl Abbas begins to make his way, he begins to split through the ranks. Historians say that he kills up to 80 individuals. As Abul Fadl Abbas gets to the river Furat, he jumps off of his horse. He takes the water bag and he opens it up. As he's beginning to fill up the bag of water, he puts his hand into the water and cups up a hand of water. He thinks for a second in his mind that, should I drink this water? And he says those beautiful words of poetry that, Ya nafsu min ba'dil Hussein huni. Oh soul, how can you live after Hussein? How can you even think about drinking a drop of this water while your master Hussein, he's drinking of the cup of Shahada? Abul Fadl Abbas reminds himself that this is not the way of my religion. This is not the way that I have been brought up. Brothers and sisters, Abul Fadl Abbas throws the water back into the Furat. He fills up that container, he closes it up, he puts it around his neck and jumps back onto his horse. As he's riding back as fast as he can towards the enemy ranks, the enemies who are too scared to approach him, they begin to encircle him to try to prevent him from going so fast back to the camp. We're told that as he approaches one of the trees on the way back to the tents, that an enemy jumps up from behind and strikes the right arm of Abul Fadl Abbas. As Abbas is riding, his right arm falls off his hand. The bag of water which is on his right hand, he transfers it to his left hand. Now in his left hand he has his sword, he has the alam of Imam Hussein, he has the water bag. As he proceeds to go a little bit forward, the enemy jumps up from behind another tree. They sever the left arm of Abul Fadl Abbas. He puts the bag of water into his mouth. He's holding the sword and the alam between his chest and the top of the horse. We're told that an enemy comes up. He has an iron rod that he strikes onto the head of Abul Fadl Abbas. Abul Fadl Abbas is beginning to fall off of the horse. But before that, as the arrows are going towards him, an arrow pierces the bag of the water. As Abul Fadl Abbas sees the water drain out onto the ground, he realizes that now his mission has been destroyed. Young Sakina, who is begging for water, she won't get that last sip of water from her uncle Abbas. The arrows begin to shower him. He takes arrows into his chest. An arrow goes into the socket of his eye. As he begins to fall into the ground, he begins to fall onto the ground. But keep in mind, brothers and sisters, he doesn't have his two hands to fall onto the ground. He doesn't have his hands to break his fall, so he falls face first onto the ground of Karbala. As Abul Fadl is falling, he screams out to his brother Hussein. He says, Ya akha. He says, Adrikna ya Hussein. He says, oh my brother, please come and see the state of the affairs of your brother Abbas. Imam Hussein runs towards the battlefield. He makes his way as fast as he can. The historians make it seem like he's as if he's a lion coming towards his prey. He gets to his brother Abbas. He gets to his brother Abbas just before he's about to leave this world. He has the head of Abbas in his lap. Abbas asks his brother, his master, he says, oh Mawla, allow me to see your beautiful face one last time before I leave this world. Imam Hussein cleans the blood out of the eye of Abul Fadl Abbas. Imam Hussein cleans the eyes out of the blood. Abbas looks at his master Hussein and he bids farewell to his master Hussein. وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلِبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. We ask Allah, by the right of Fatima and her husband and her father and her two sons, that Allah accept this act of worship from us tonight. We ask Allah to give us the shafa'at of Abu al-Fadl Abbas in the akhirat, and allow us to have the ziyarat of Abu al-Fadl Abbas in this dunya. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم. ماتم حسين.